Story 1 at the elevator that went too far. I never liked elevators. Something about being trapped in a small, metal box, suspended by cables, always made me uneasy. But that night, I learned there were worse things than being stuck between floors. It was almost midnight when I left the office, exhausted from another long shift. The building was nearly empty, the hallways eerily silent. I pressed the elevator button, watching as the numbers slowly descended. Ding! The doors slid open. I stepped inside and pressed L for the lobby. The doors closed, and the elevator began its slow descent. Everything was normal until it wasn't. The elevator didn't stop at the lobby. The floor indicator continued past L, the numbers changing to -1, -2, -3. I frowned. The building didn't have a basement. I pressed the emergency stop button. Nothing happened. The lights flickered. My stomach twisted as the air grew colder. The sensation of movement felt wrong, like the elevator was falling too fast, yet I wasn't floating or losing my balance. Then it stopped. The doors slid open. A dimly lit hallway stretched before me, lined with old wooden doors. The walls were cracked, the wallpaper peeling as if abandoned for decades. A deep, musty smell filled the air. This wasn't my building. I stayed inside the elevator, heart pounding. I pressed the button to go back up. Nothing. The doors didn't close. The only sound was the faint hum of electricity from the flickering overhead light. Then footsteps, soft, slow, coming from the hallway. I held my breath. A shadow moved at the far end of the corridor. Then another. Figures emerged, stepping into the dim light. Their faces were wrong, stretched, hollow, like their skin was barely clinging to their skulls. Their mouths hung open in silent screams. Their empty eyes locked onto me. I frantically pressed the closed door button. The elevator didn't respond. The figures began walking toward me, their movements unnatural, their bones making sickening cracks with every step. I slammed my fists against the control panel, pressing every button. A distorted voice crackled through the speakers. Going down. The elevator plummeted. My stomach lurched as I gripped the railing, the numbers on the panel flickering rapidly. -10, -20, -30. It didn't stop. The air grew colder, the walls groaning under pressure. The dim lights cast eerie shadows that twisted and stretched. My ears popped, and a strange whispering filled the space. Voices speaking in a language I didn't understand. Then, the elevator jerked to a stop. Ding! The doors opened again. Darkness. Pure, endless black stretched beyond the threshold. A void, empty yet somehow alive. A feeling of absolute dread washed over me. Something was in there, watching, waiting. Then, a long, pale hand reached out from the darkness. It grasped the edge of the elevator, fingers too long, nails sharp and jagged. Another hand followed, then a third. I couldn't move. A grotesque head slowly emerged from the blackness. Its face was human, almost. The skin was too tight, the eyes too large, the mouth stretched into a grin filled with jagged teeth. It laughed. The sound was wrong, high-pitched, gurgling, like something struggling to mimic human laughter. I snapped out of my trance and smashed the close button repeatedly. The doors wouldn't move. The creature crawled forward. Its limbs bent in unnatural ways as it pulled itself closer, its body too long, too thin. Just as it reached the doorway, the elevator lurched upward. The doors slammed shut. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The elevator rocketed upward, shaking violently as if it would tear apart. The whispers grew louder, an unseen force slamming against the walls from the outside. Then, ding, the movement stopped. The doors slid open. I was back in my office building. The familiar, sterile hallway stretched before me. The normal, everyday world. But something felt wrong. The air was too still, too silent. I stepped out, legs shaking. The elevator doors closed behind me. I turned to look at the floor indicator above the door. It didn't show a number, just one word: waiting. The elevator never left. It was still there, and it was waiting for me to ride again. Story 2: The Elevator to the Other Side. I always worked late at the office. My building had 25 floors, and since my office was on the 23rd floor, I always took the elevator down. I never thought there was anything strange about it until one night I pressed the wrong button. That night, I was the last one in the office. I stepped into the elevator and absent-mindedly pressed L for the lobby. But somehow, my finger also touched B, the basement button. I didn't think much of it as the elevator began its descent. Then, something felt wrong. The elevator didn't stop at the lobby. B1, B2, B3. My heart pounded. I knew for a fact this building only had one basement. There was no B2, let alone B3. I pressed the emergency stop button. Nothing happened. The elevator kept going. B4, B5, B6. The air grew cold. My breath turned to mist. The lights flickered, as if the power was unstable. Ding! The elevator stopped. The doors opened. I swallowed hard and peered outside. Beyond the elevator was a long, dark corridor. Dim, flickering lights hung from an unusually high ceiling. The walls were cracked, covered in patches of damp mold. The concrete floor was wet, as if something had recently spilled. The air smelled of earth and decay. I did not step out. I quickly pressed the closed door button, but the doors wouldn't close. That's when I felt it. I was not alone. My heart nearly stopped as I saw something move at the end of the corridor. The figure was tall, thin, with unnaturally long arms. Its skin was a dull, grayish hue, stretched tightly over its frame. Its head tilted slightly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. And then I realized it was also looking at me. Not with eyes, because it had no eyes, but I felt it staring. It began to walk. Its movement was strange, too fast for how slowly it stepped. I panicked. I pressed every button on the panel. Nothing worked. I almost screamed as the thing got closer. Its hands reached out, fingers twitching as if about to touch the elevator door. Ding! The elevator shot upward. The doors slammed shut just before the thing could enter. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. My hands were shaking, my mind racing. I looked at the floor panel. No numbers were lit. No indicator showed what floor I was heading to. Then, something whispered. The voice came from the elevator speaker. "Not here." I froze. The elevator stopped again. The doors opened. I saw my office. Everything looked normal. My desk, my computer, even my coffee cup was still there. I stepped out. I wanted to cry from relief. But then, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My computer was on. There was a new email. From unknown. Subject: don't leave. Message: this is not your place. I looked around. my body trembling. Then I noticed the smallest, most terrifying detail: the clock on my desk. It was ticking backward. I wasn't in my office. I was still in the elevator. I never made it back. And maybe I never will. Story 3. The elevator that shouldn't exist. I worked in a skyscraper in the heart of the city. The building was modern, with glass elevators that provided a view of the entire skyline as they moved up and down. Every day, I used those elevators without a second thought, until one night, I found an elevator that shouldn't exist. That day, I worked late, staying longer than usual. By the time I decided to leave, the office was empty. I walked toward the usual elevator area, but when I got there, I noticed something strange. There was an extra elevator at the far end of the hallway. I was sure there had only ever been 3 elevators, but now there were 4. The new elevator looked older than the others. Its paint was slightly faded, and its call button didn't light up. Yet, as I approached, its doors opened on their own. I should have walked away. I should have never stepped inside. But I did. And that was the biggest mistake of my life. The wrong descent. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the air was colder than it should have been. The lighting was dimmer, not as bright as the other elevators. I pressed L for the lobby. The doors closed with a click, a sound that didn't feel right. The elevator began to descend, but something was wrong. I looked at the floor indicator. There were no numbers. Instead, it displayed strange symbols, lines, and markings that looked ancient, written in a language I didn't recognize. Panic crept in. I pressed other buttons. None of them worked. The elevator kept going down. I swallowed hard, anxiety rising. This building only had 40 floors, 20 above ground and 20 below, including the basement. But this elevator kept ascending. Floor minus 21, floor minus 30, floor minus 50. I started to feel sick. The temperature dropped even further, and I could see my breath fogging up the air. Ding! The elevator stopped. The doors opened. Outside was not the lobby. Outside was not the basement. Outside was not the world I knew. Somewhere I shouldn't be. I stood frozen in the elevator, too afraid to step out. What lay before me was a dark, endless corridor. The walls were made of slick black stone, and the ceiling stretched so high that it vanished into shadows. The air smelled of damp earth and something rotten. I wanted to hit the close button, but before I could move, I saw it. At the end of the corridor, something was standing there. At first, I thought it was just a shadow. Then, it moved. It was tall and unnaturally thin, towering over any normal person. Its arms were long, ending in fingers that curved into sharp points. Its face, or what should have been its face, was blurred, as if my eyes couldn't focus on it. I couldn't breathe. Then, it stepped forward. Every time it moved, I heard a faint click echo through the corridor. A chill unlike anything I had ever felt crawled through my skin. Not fear, something deeper, a primal terror, a feeling that I had stepped into a place no human should ever enter. My mind snapped back to reality, and I frantically pressed the buttons. Nothing worked. The thing came closer. Now, I could see it more clearly. Its skin was like shattered glass, glowing faintly in the darkness. Its eyes, or where its eyes should have been, were 2 hollow voids, pulsating like they were breathing. Then, it sprinted toward me. I screamed and pressed every button. Ding! The doors slammed shut just before it could get inside. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Back or not, the elevator started moving up. I trembled, too afraid to move. I stared at the floor indicator, hoping I was returning to my world. Then, I saw it. The display wasn't showing numbers. It was a single word: return. I had no idea what that meant. I didn't know if this elevator was truly taking me home. But one thing was certain: I would never step into an unfamiliar elevator again. Because some elevators don't take you where you want to go. Some elevators take you to places that should not exist. And maybe not everyone comes back.